I'm gonna understand where the plane is behind the barn, all right? Because the barn is sitting into this hill. If I draw that line first, I'm not going to really get the same kind of gauge. But if I look at this, well, it's ultimately that's where what I say. I always say, let me find where the baseline is of the ground. Right, the trees are growing out of the ground. You see them further behind. You see how the tree line is higher than the line of the barn, the base of the trees, right? And if you look at the base of the tree in the front, it's lower than the barn. So that idea of being stepping back in planes, if I first understand where the two planes are, then I can properly place the things. So I would, ultimately with this, if I do it just as it is here, I'll change it. I'm going to lower it just a little bit. So I'll draw that line straight through, even if it's not going to show up. All right, I'm going to draw that straight through. If we draw lines that just sort of stop and start, we're going to end up with a disjointed disconnection in our painting. So I'm always drawing through things. It's going to be so light. There's going to be paint, watercolor on top. It won't really matter.
And are you calling that your horizon line?
So yes, but what I mean by it's basically just where the ground would stop and the sky would begin. If we move the barn, move the hill, move the trees, and in this I'm kind of making it up. So really what I'm using that as is kind of the line where the trees sit in the background, right? And this is just an establishing line so I can understand where I'm going to put my important lines. So from that, I would then probably say the barn is a man-made structure. It's more important than those trees. If I went there 5 years ago and took this picture, those trees would be different. If I go back there in 10 years, those trees would be different. If I go back in 10 years, this barn might not even be there. So when it comes to organic things, a lot of times I'm going to put the organic thing in last because that's just a support to add a backdrop to the main thing, which the big show here is the barn. So as I start with this barn and I say, actually I kind of want to see the top of it. So I'm gonna start, and this is an idea of one connected line, even though it's not a straight line. It's a connected line. And I think, how high is this? How tall is this? How high is this? How tall is this? What was that? That was basically one. Now I can say this other line, I'm going to want this to do that. So this is line number 1. This is line number 2. No, 3. This top of this barn structure is line number 2. Line number 3 is going to be, where does this come in and start to come up? And then lines 4 and 5 are going to be, what am I blocking with the tree here? And I might just do that just for a basic exercise, a basic geometric breakdown exercise. Reduce it down to what you can see. Now, I think I'll move this out of the exercise and into, well, how would you actually draw that from understanding it in that adjustments way? And lifting up the pencil. So earlier on when I said, do you see that little motion? That's like, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, I'm touching you, I want to keep in motion as if I was doing a continuous line. And the faster your brain processes, the faster you can move at this. So I won't go at full pace. I'll slow it down into a thoughtful judging. All right, so I'm just going to put this in because I know that somewhere back there, that just gives me a gauge. That line isn't even in the picture. Like that line is not in the picture at all. It's just so I can understand how much space do I have above that line and how much space do I have to get this hill, the front of this hillside into it. All right, so if I think about that, and I think about this, and I think about the other thing, and I think about how high do I want this barn, and then how wide. Gauging, measuring, gauging, measuring, gauging. And I'm obviously not getting the whole picture in here. Now from that, I would switch over okay, why did I move there? Because when that drops down, I could just continue right into then gauging where this line is. And this would go out of the picture over here essentially. So this is that other roof going off. And then I can make a decision of where that tree line is. And at this point I can say, oops, where do I want this? This is the worst angle to make, is the one that goes this way. Now I could say, do I want that tree smack dab in the middle, or do I want to move it? So that becomes a compositional accent. I could even just leave it out of there, if which I probably would. And I would probably say, I'm going to take that tree and put it back here, just from an idea of composition. And I would probably add in a couple windows. So whether these windows are here or not, they would come in after the fact because they're just an element that lends to filling up the space there. But that's basically how I would take that information and move into that. Now I can't help but not do things. I changed the composition. I didn't do it one-to-one. So I can get rid of that tree, but I like the idea of that tree because essentially that would add a foil to frame in back here. Could have another foil to frame in this edge here. This is the dark of the trees back here. Just to continue the talk about composition, but that creates an interesting shape that's going to be interesting for the painting. And to take up the space here, I'd probably bring in kind of a cast shadow of some sort that comes across there. And then if I was gonna put a person, he's got to be set the stage before we put the actors to work. Maybe he's got a wheelbarrow or something. All right, so the hierarchy, it starts with that line and then it gets slowly reduced, filling up the space of the. We're going to shoot into different. Look at the reference. This is all just confusing, shadowed stuff anyway. If I put a figure in there, now he was just to help me gauge. I'll get rid of that guy and make sure I keep all of the information and focus going to this focal point as it is in the picture. All right.
So a quick question. So this is the right amount of detail for the watercolor paper. Before this, presumably you're wanting to do a few thumbnails just to look at the compositions. Maybe you want to cut off part of the building because it's not interesting. What's the right amount of detail then for the thumbnail? Is it the buildings and the umbrellas and the car without the windows in the buildings and maybe the lines of the road?
Okay, good question. Let's do a thumbnail version of this, all right? So when it comes to a thumbnail, they're called thumbnail for a reason, right? They're, so normally when I do a thumbnail on camera, it's bigger than it needs to be. I'll do an actual thumbnail, okay, of if I needed to break this scene down just to clarify, right? So the thumbnail, we want to clarify what's happening. And I'll put it right about here. So again, if I do this thumbnail in a different proportion, it's going to give me completely different information. But when I do a thumbnail and I'm happy with it, that becomes just as much as the reference photo, because I've made decisions and I've made corrections for this. So that will then inform this. This will probably inform for, tone and color and those kinds of things. But when I do any kind of design thumbnail, you want to make sure you're using that to also then inform your painting. So I'll just pretend like I'm doing a thumbnail of this. I'm going to say, all right, how tall is that? With this other building. This is an important piece of light. This is an important piece of light cascading through. And that's probably about what I would do for a thumbnail. Now, sometimes that doesn't really give me enough information, all right? So a lot of times my thumbnails become a notan, all right? So the notan sketch is anything that's 50% to 0% becomes white. Anything that's 51% to 100% black becomes black. So it just becomes a two-tone pattern. And that helps us gauge the design pattern. So going back to this barn scenario, I would feel like putting that in there and sketching that out. I know my sky's, oh, this pen is dead. I know my sky's going to be my light source. So that's going to be white. I know these trees are going to be darker than this roof. Those trees help frame out that shape. This tree helps frame out that shape. And we'll start to see an abstract design pattern. And ultimately, I would probably even say tonally, this is gonna, and it's a whitish barn, so this would end up being darker. So moving this into a notan, that would probably be what the notan of this would be. And it's, what are these interesting aspects of shape? Now, this would be a slightly darker tone than that, but not in the notan. So if I erase those lines, and I just think about, also if you squint your eyes, you'll be able to see this a little bit, but if I squint my eyes down and think about the pattern that's made between black and white, that's what I'm looking at with the notan. And actually, I talked about putting a shadow on that. So as I look at this and I say, oh, you know what? Actually, that's what I would use the notan for, is how far out do I want this pattern to go? Do I want it more angled? Like there's another building over here, or a silo, which there actually used to be a silo there. They've taken it down. But at some point there would have been a shadow that could have done exactly that, So that's the benefit of taking it further and looking at but that goes into design concepts, right?
Right. Thank you.
But with this guy, I know those white awnings are going to be important, And what they do is they add a connection over to where this white awning is. And this will look really neat. Probably. So that's how far I would take a thumbnail and a notan. Now, if you look at that and you look at the photo, do you see how that kind of would relate to what's happening in the pattern of light there, right?
Yes.
So now I wouldn't paint that, you know, I'll still paint it with all of the range of midtones and stuff, but that just gives me an understanding of what are the balances here? How much light is up here versus the balance of light back here? And if you look really close at this and you think about the light hitting those umbrellas and then picking up on the light on the awning on the other side, that creates two pieces of light shooting in, and it adds a connection. All right, so it's connecting lights, even though they don't perfectly connect, they connect the idea of lights as much as the idea of these darks connect to frame out these other light subjects. So if you've ever drawn in a ballpoint pen, it's also another great exercise. You have to know where that line is going before you start the line. Same thing with the general sense of watercolor. I need to know where this painting is going before I start the painting. I need to kind of think about, what is this going to look like when I'm done? So each one of these lines becomes a consideration before that line is made. And most of the time that ends up in me doing these little like squiggles, right? Think about that. And one of the other things we didn't really get to talk about yet today is, and I can pick up because I finished that line. All right, so rhythm and pattern and things that are not just, I did it once, I'm going to do it again. I did it 2 times, I'm going to do it 3 times. I did it 3 times, I'm going to do it 4 times. I'm really being considerate of ba 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 da da do 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 do. All right. This is taller than that. This is lower than that. This is lower than that. So that idea, and no one will know if you've copied that mountain exact or not. I may try to get some personality of it. If you're going to paint the Matterhorn, it better look like the Matterhorn. If you're going to paint Mount Rainier, it better look like Mount Rainier. You know, like that kind of thing. But if it's just a random strip of the Utah Valley, I bet I could find the exact line of this about a mile up. All right, so you know, like that idea of that literalness doesn't matter. And now, why did I want to bring this up here? Well, because I'm already thinking when I do my sky, I'll probably bring the motion of the sky in this way, then I get the mountain down this way, I get the dip of water this way, and ultimately, this is where my focal point is going to be. All right, and that's going beyond the idea of just straight up drawing for painting, but I'm thinking about those rhythms, thinking forward about where. Okay, so here we go with the painting, and I'm always starting with my furthest part of the subject first, which in this case is the sky. I'm also working light to dark and top to bottom, painting at about a 45-degree angle. So I'm putting in almost just essentially a dirty water here to start to create some of the cloud patterns. And now I'm coming in with the basically just a cobalt blue, and I'll get some edges against the clouds. I'll get some soft edges, and I'm not going to rush through this. I've got plenty of time to kind of think about the design, think about the movement of the sky as I work my way through with this cobalt blue, and some of it will touch into this damp paper. And you'll see that it's not just dripping straight down. So the paper's not super wet. It's just kind of damp to give me these lovely soft edges. So as I'm working through, I'm really, I'm very concerned about creating a variety of edges. So I'm going to want some very soft, melty edges. I'm going to be looking to keep some broken edges, really keep an energy in the sky. But ultimately, in watercolor, when I paint a sky, I'm essentially painting air. So the whole thing just needs to retain this very translucent, kind of airy, floaty quality. And once I work through a sky, I will never go back and work in it again. The sky needs to retain that freshness, retain the light, and really be the source of light of the whole painting. So as I start coming down, I'm actually working right through where the top of the mountains are. And in just a second here, I will transition into a base color of the mountains to start with a soft edge where the mountains meet the sky. Again, I want to create, even though it's a sunny day, I'm going to want a little bit of a feeling of distance and atmosphere and atmospheric perspective. So I'll bring that wash down, and now I'm going to go right into mixing. I think I'll use a little bit of cobalt turquoise, a little bit of yellow ochre, tiny bit of blue in there, and coming back with a little bit more yellow ochre. So I'm always working back and forth in the palette until I see what I'm looking for and making sure it's tonally correct and that the consistency is correct. This can't be too light. It can't be too dark. It needs to stand off against the sky, but it's also really just the first establishing wash of the sky. And I'll bring that down about to the horizon. So what's really important about this section of the painting is that mountain was still wet, and I noticed that it wasn't going to contrast as much as I wanted against the sky. So the time that I can adjust this and just kind of deepen that contrast is now, while it's wet, not letting it dry and then creating a whole separate layer. I'm just going to go right into working and adjusting that initial wash into the tone that I'm looking for. Okay, so this is going to go into a time lapse. In the master classes, these are full demonstration paintings, full demonstration discussions on theory, whether it's foundational, such as composition or drawing or design or color theory, or if it's subject-based, such as a series of distant mountains with a lake in front of it, as you see here. In the master classes, these are full demos. For the interest of time in this kind of introduction to what you will see during a master class or through one of my live classes. You'll see the palette is in full view. You can see me up in the corner, and you'll have a large view of what's happening in the painting. I hope you've enjoyed this preview and peek into what to expect in some of the content on danmartialart.com. And I'll just let this play through as I put in these final details and work out these structures. But I hope to see you in either one of my live masterclasses or see you on the website. And I hope to see you in one of my in-person workshops. And thanks again for joining the newsletter. Okay, so that pretty much takes us from the beginning of my headphone here. Takes us from the beginning of taking a reference picture, altering it, drawing for the painting, drawing to support the painting. Everything is coming down into the focal point here, which is in the third. These are just directionals that kind of bring us over in there, and trying to keep a sort of movement through the painting, but that's done by rearranging it through the drawing. So thanks for doing the masterclass, and I'll see you at the next one. All right, bye. Put my jams back on.